are really excited because today we're joined by Heidi Gardner, who's a distinguished fellow at Harvard University. And Heidi's done lots of research into the ROI on collaboration. So thank you so much for joining us, Heidi.
Oh, my pleasure indeed. Thank you so much for having me. As you know, I live and breathe this idea about collaboration being something that's measurable and actually has a positive ROI. So every chance I get to talk about it, I leap on it.
Fantastic. And I'm also joined by Kjaer, who's the CEO of SWOOP Analytics. And I didn't introduce myself. I'm Sharon Dawson, and I'm the Director of Communications for SWOOP Analytics. Kjaer, this was your idea to ask Heidi to join us. Can you give me a little bit of background about how the two of you met?
Well, I've got a bit of a professional crush on Heidi, to be quite honest. When she wrote that article called "When Senior Managers Won't Collaborate," came out in the Harvard Business Review in 2015, I read it and I thought, wow, here's the first time someone has actually tried to put money on collaboration. And I was trained as a lawyer, so the fact that Heidi was looking at what was happening in law firms and professional services firms was particularly interesting for me. And I've been referencing that article, I can't believe it's 5 years ago, Heidi, that you wrote that one. But I thought it was just sharp. It was to the point, and I thought, wouldn't it be amazing if I could meet Heidi one day? So we actually met in Sydney a few years ago, and I can't remember, Heidi, whether it was at the time when you put out the book Smart Collaboration.
I was in Sydney as part of my book tour.
Oh, right. Which I, just to give you a bit of interview, have a signed copy of from Heidi. So I'm delighted to have Heidi with us today, because we live in this world with the pandemic going on where collaboration has never been more important than it is now. Yet I think there's so much more in it than just having chat, call and meetings and that kind of stuff, and how we actually get each other to collaborate. But there's also some challenges around that, and I hope today that through this conversation that Heidi can illuminate us on the ROI, so we can get some of those hard-nosed CFOs and CEOs and managers in general sort of with us on this journey towards better, more efficient, better collaborating organizations.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, thanks for everyone who's joining us. And one thing is that we would love to make this a dialogue, a discussion, as interactive as we can. So Sharon, what do you want people to do? Do you want them to raise their hand, or how should we do that?
Yep, so we've got a chat. Everyone will know how to use the chat in Teams. If you just want to pop a question in the chat, and I'll monitor that. And also, I'll feel free to use your microphone and just ask a question as well. And I'll keep an eye on the chat, and I'll just butt in, Heidi, if you don't mind, when anyone's ready to ask a question, and we'll jump in with that. So I'll hand over to you, Heidi, but everybody, please feel free. We really want to make this more, as Heidi said, collaborative. So feel free to just hit us with questions at any time.
Great. Thank you so much, Sharon, and thanks, Kai. I do really hope that we will make this interactive. What you've got here in front of you is two of the books on smart collaboration that I've worked on with my research team. So the one on the right is the one that Kai was holding. That came out in 2016, and it was our first attempt at understanding how to take this topic that so many people call a soft topic, and make it smart instead. So collaboration, does it really just mean that we're all getting along well? And so we really wanted to dive in and figure out how to put some science and some math behind this. So Sharon, let me just check. You're able to see the screen at this point? Okay, fantastic.
Yep, see the screen. Yep.
Great. So smart collaboration, what is it? Well, when we embarked on this journey more than 10 years ago, I was at Harvard Business School then as a professor of organizational behavior. I've since moved to Harvard Law School. We wanted to figure out, why is it that we heard all of this sort of bubbling up questions about collaboration? And we wanted to make sure that we weren't going to spend the next decade plus researching a topic that was going to be a flash in the pan. So we identified a couple of underlying trends that at the point were creating some tension, because they were really kind of rubbing up against each other. And now the friction between them is enough to start a fire. So what are these trends? Well, there's two of them. On the one hand, knowledge professionals. And that doesn't matter if you're a lawyer or an accountant or a software engineer or even a physician. Everyone who's dealing in the realm of expertise needs to go deep, deep, deep in their domain, because that's the nature of how fast knowledge is changing these days. If you want to stay on top of an area and truly be an expert, world class, you need to go deep in that area, which demands that you get narrower and narrower in your specialization. And this is not my idea, by the way. I mean, historians of science and people who study the medical profession and social commentators like Malcolm Gladwell, they're writing about this idea of hyper specialization. So that's necessary, an adaptive response to fast changing knowledge. So what's the problem? Well, the problem is our problems these days. Any issue worth thinking about is almost inherently multidisciplinary, multifaceted. We use the term, it's an acronym, VUCA. I'm not sure if you've heard that one before. Volatile, uncertain, complex, ambiguous. That means that these problems are incredibly broad-reaching. And when you put those two trends together, narrow, deep experts and big, complicated problems, that's what creates the demand for truly smart collaboration. We're talking about experts who integrate their knowledge in order to tackle more sophisticated problems than any of them could do on their own. Not because they're not smart or hardworking, it's because each of them is bringing a sort of different spotlight to a problem, and together they illuminate it in ways that allow them to tackle these bigger issues. And frankly, I have never in my lifetime seen anything more VUCA than COVID. Or perhaps it's the confluence of, I'm living in the States these days, COVID, the resulting economic crisis, not just the global health pandemic, and all sorts of issues around racial injustice and racial equality and societal divisions, not to mention an upcoming election. So you put all of those together and it's a pretty VUCA environment we're living in. Anyone who's trying to find solutions these days to what seems like potentially, one relatively straightforward question, what would it take to bring a third of our workers back into the office, suddenly realize they have to call on people from so many different domains in order to be able to make an informed decision. That's what we're talking about, smart collaborations, those experts coming together to tackle those problems. Now, here's the ROI bit, right? Hopefully you like numbers. Hopefully you are intrigued by how would you ever measure something like collaboration? Well, we started by collecting data from just a couple global organizations. We started with some global professional service firms because it makes it easy the way they track their data in terms of these utilization databases, which partner is spending time with which associates on which client project. And what we were able to do is look at how many different units, how many different business units, or they might be called practice groups or so forth, inside a firm were serving any given client. So maybe you're looking at one of the big four accounting firms and the client is ExxonMobil. You're going to say, okay, well, you've got audit and tax and cybersecurity and other consulting around their culture. So you've got these, 4 different business units that are serving ExxonMobil. And then you have other oil and gas companies, and you've got a different combination of services. So we quantified how many of these different services were being provided to each and every client for one of the global professional firms. And then we said, and how much value is being created for those clients? We measured that by saying clients are smart. They pay for the value they think they're getting. So the revenues are a good proxy for how much value is created. Now here's the data. The blue bars show the productivity or the revenue generated from collaboration when the number of practice groups increases. And then we replicated this in a second firm and we saw the same pattern. Notice on the left, there's this black line that kind of, no pun intended, swoops upwards, right? So that is what the computer spits out when you say, show me an exponential curve. So it shouldn't be surprising to anyone that if you sell more services to a client or a customer, they pay you more money. But the data climb exponentially. They don't just add up. If all you were doing is working in a siloed way, where in that former example, you had the tax consultants going in and providing tax advice, and then you had the cyber consultants providing cyber advice, and so on and so forth, and they were doing this independently instead of collaboratively, you would have results that add up. But we see the increase being exponential. And when we talked to some CFOs, I mean, they're pretty, smart individuals, we said, do you realize that you're sort of overpaying when you get collaborative service? And they say yes, because those experts are coming together to tackle our complex problems and margins rise with complexity. There's a research study by Bain and Company. I'm actually a former McKinsey and Company consultant, so I have to give credit where it's due. Bain and Company does come up with some good things, and I love this phrase: complexity grows in the seams between organizational units. So when anyone wants to tackle complexity, they have to get this cross-unit, this cross-silo mentality that you're going to figure out how to tackle this complexity by bringing different units together in a collaborative fashion. And that's what we're talking about with smart collaboration. Now, we have replicated this, as I said, initially with professional service firms. We went to financial institutions, we went to healthcare organizations and biotech companies and commercial real estate. I mean, all different kinds of organizations. And we've crunched the data, and we can see that when people work together, despite being separated into different business units or divisions or offices even, that they are able to add more value than they would be able to do on their own. Now, we show this data all the time. I teach a lot of executives at Harvard Business School and Harvard Law School, and I do a lot of private work with clients as well. So if I'm presenting what we just talked about and say a big keynote, I can look out into the room. In the good old days, we could actually be together in a room, and I would sort of see a thought bubble over people's heads, and it would say something like, it's all well and good that if I team up across organizational silos that we generate that much value for our company and our clients. But what's in it for me? Very few people kind of say that out loud. Some do, but we wanted to know the answer to that. Are individuals, people who choose to collaborate with their peers, are they better off or worse off than their fellow partners or colleagues? And here's what we did. With the help of one of my amazing research associates, he combed through the millions of data records. We collected data from so many different organizations, and we found two nearly identical professionals. They were in the same company, in the same role. They'd graduated the same year, so we thought they were about the same age. They'd spent the same amount of time with this company, and they actually billed the same number of hours, roughly, in the same year. And so we know that it's not that one person was working much harder than another. And we were able to take the project management databases that show who's worked with whom and create a map of their collaboration. So the quote unquote twin whom we're studying, he's the one who's circled in red. They both happen to be men, so I say he as well. And now the way you read one of these network diagrams, if you're not familiar with it, every dot on there represents a senior level professional in this organization. And the lines that connect them signify that they have worked for a material amount of time on a same project together. They're not just kind of working side by side, they're actually working together. Now, that's twin number one. There's this other colleague of his, a peer, same level, same kind of job. He chooses to work really differently. Take a look at this. This is his collaboration map. It looks kind of like a crazy spider web going on here. You'll see that it's not just that he's collaborating with many more colleagues. It's also that, I didn't mention, they're color-coded for a reason. They're color-coded by their type of expertise, or in this case, their expertise was encapsulated in a business unit. And so he's working with lots more business units, many more individuals across these different colored business units. And importantly, he's connecting people who themselves are great collaborators. So the what's in it for me question, who do you think is better off in terms of business outcomes? Well, in this organization, we were able to take these two individuals and track their performance. The performance wasn't their individual performance. The performance was the performance in revenue and profit, other financial metrics for teams where they were the lead or the co-lead for those teams. And here's what we found. Twin 2, the more highly collaborative individual, was more than 4 times, with his team, was more than 4 times more productive than Twin 1 and the teams that he was running. So what's going on here? What does Twin 2 get out of this? Those of you who, have a bit of a statistical bent to your thinking might say, well, this is just correlation. It's not causality. True, right? This is just a snapshot in time. What over a 1-year period, what does the network look like for Twin 1 and Twin 2? And in that same year, what are their business outcomes? All we know is that one is correlated with the other. But what I will tell you, and it's in chapter 1 of our book, the first Smart Collaboration book, chapter 1 is called The Business Case for Collaboration. And we outline there the statistical models that we run, that we use, huge data sets, and we control for all kinds of factors that we would expect to affect business performance. And we still get these results. We can isolate the results of collaboration itself. How much did people work together? How many other people did they work with? How extensively was that? How many years did that span? Did they work with a variety of different kinds of people or with the same people over and over? All the ways that we can measure collaborative capacity, we plug those into statistical models, and again and again and again, we see these kinds of business outcomes. And the question is, why? Why is it that somebody with a network, a collaborative pattern like Twin 2 is so much more productive? Well, part of what we understand from all of our research, we do this a lot of different ways, qualitative and quantitative and case studies and big data sets. We know that people who have a network like Twin 2, they get exposure to new ideas. They're oftentimes on the cutting edge of innovation. They hear about things because they've got all of these eyes and ears in the market, and that business intel comes back to them. So information is one of the resources that flows through those lines, as does trust. So think about it. Twin 2 has worked with all of these other people directly. That's what these lines signify, remember? So he knows that he can trust these people because he has firsthand direct experience with them. So if he's on a client call and figures out that they need somebody with, kind of esoteric expertise, maybe somebody in his network is somebody that he knows he can already trust to deliver that kind of expertise brilliantly. So he rings them up. But either they say, oh, hang on, I don't do that kind of work anymore, or I'm too busy or something. But why don't you call the next person over? He trusts their reference. He trusts their referral because he trusts them. And that's how you sort of build out this almost cloud of trust, because people, they can trust each other's competencies, they can trust each other's judgment, they trust each other's integrity, and it builds on itself. So long story short, collaboration pays out, not just for the company, not just for your customers and clients. It pays out for the individuals who engage in this. And we've measured this in a whole variety of ways. We know that people's reputation expands. They're more likely to get promoted. The company benefits because people who are highly collaborative tend to stay longer inside an organization. And somewhat interestingly, even if they leave the organization, the more collaborative they were during the course of their employment, the more likely they are to remain kind of a friend of the company when they leave. And that pays back in terms of referring potential recruits. Everyone's always looking to build their talent pipeline, and they want people who have left the company to say positive things to others who are thinking about joining, to potential customers and clients, the press, you name it. So collaboration pays out in a whole variety of ways, and we can measure it. Now, if you don't believe me and you don't believe the data that I've got, Gallup has been doing a tremendous amount of research on this. And what I love about the Gallup research, aside from the fact that they've got 1.4 million employees in tens of thousands of teams, they're able to link engagement and motivation to some of these hard outcomes. And here's how they measured engagement. They asked all 50,000 people, to what extent do you agree with this statement? At work, I have the opportunity to do what I do best every day. So people who are highly engaged, they feel like they're drawing on their strengths, they're doing their best work day in and day out. They measured then the outcomes, a considerable amount of time down the road, and they found out that in teams with strong agreement, customer satisfaction was up 44%. Teams where people believed they were doing their best work day in and day out satisfied their customers much better. They retained their talent at 50% better than teams where people didn't feel this level of engagement, and productivity was up 38%. So what does this have to do with collaboration? Well, collaboration, almost by definition, at least the way we've defined it, means that people are playing to their strengths. Right? It gives me the opportunity to say, here's the thing that I'm an expert in. I've gone pretty deep in this. I'm an expert in collaboration. Now, how do I find somebody who's an expert in the adjacent area, because I need somebody with a technical mindset to help bring that perspective in. So it allows me to say, I'm going to stick to what I know best around collaboration, and I'm going to bring in somebody who knows what they know best around technology, and we're going to team up and we're going to tackle a technology collaboration problem together. Right? So we're all playing to our strengths. We're going to be more engaged, more motivated, and end up with better financial and strategic results for ourselves and the group. Sharon, I've been talking a lot. Any questions, thoughts, observations before we move on?
We haven't got any questions coming
Okay.
through at the moment. But this is so interesting. This really aligns with a lot of recent research we've done as well, Heidi, about just that trust and those relationships, and how, you know, I'll share it in the chat group. We actually had an article published yesterday by our chief scientist, and it was just about this. If you are stressed at work, there's sort of a good stress and a bad stress, and those good stresses are when you've got trust and these two-way relationships at work. The bad stresses is like twin one, where you're just overcome by all this pressure of work. So it just really aligns with the research that you're sharing. But I do have a question here. Oh no, it's just oh yeah, here's one from Anna. Anna, did you want to jump in and ask your question, or shall I read it out?
Yeah, you can read it out. Thank you.
Okay. So Anna's asking, how do you break the silos within the institution to foster collaboration? Great question, Anna. So breaking the silos, Heidi, to get that collaboration happening.
Yeah, well, so hopefully everyone has a good 12 hours and a strong cup of coffee, because we could talk about this really for quite some time. Anna, there's really only one definitive answer here. It depends. What we know is that organizations face really different kinds of barriers to collaboration. So my first kind of question back to you is, what's your sense for where those barriers are? And indeed, you know, that is the very next question that we were going to explore on our discussion now, is if collaboration is so great, why aren't we doing it more? So let me tell you some of the root causes that we find being blockers to collaboration. You know, why is it that people are operating in those silos when they could be getting so much more out of it? And I'll describe to you just a few of the kinds of barriers that we have seen in our research and case studies and work with clients and organizations over the past decade. And I'll be interested in hearing from people on our session today which ones resonate with you. And then we'll get into some of these how-tos. But let's start with the root cause analysis, because unless you know what you're solving for, it's hard to know whether the solution fits. There's two kinds of trust which are essential. Sharon, you used the word trust. It sounds like it was in the article that Lori published yesterday. And trust is absolutely essential. But here's something that people may not have really thought about. Trust comes in different flavors. So in some organizations that we work with, competence trust or lack of competence trust is what stands in the way of collaboration. So this means that if I have got a juicy new project and I'm trying to figure out whom to bring onto the team to help, work on this project together, I need to trust, I need to believe in the skills, the knowledge, the expertise of anyone I would consider. That's kind of the first hurdle. And it sounds obvious when I say that, but in a lot of organizations, there is a real question mark about somebody else's competence. Now, maybe it's not their legal technical abilities if they're in a law firm. Maybe it's not their accounting abilities if they're an accounting firm. Maybe it's more something like their ability to deliver high quality on time or on budget. So there's facets that are beyond just the technical expertise. There's also question marks sometimes about people's, customer handling skills or other kinds of broader competencies. Now, we know that if there's a question mark whether somebody can deliver in a high quality way, they're not going to be brought onto the team. But we also know that that's not enough. I might think that, Joe is the greatest in the world at whatever he's the expert on. But if I think he's a jerk, I still don't want to collaborate with him. I need to trust in his character. I need to believe he's high integrity. I need to believe he's not going to steal credit, that he's not going to undermine the team dynamics. And that interpersonal trust is vital. So there's both competence and interpersonal trust that have to be at play here. So if you're in an organization that has relatively recently undergone some kind of a combination, merger, acquisition, competence trust is oftentimes an issue. Why? Well, if I'm in one of the legacy companies, I know that by definition, half the people who just joined our company in that acquisition, half of them by definition are below average. I just don't know which ones, right? And so I'm going to be worried about reaching out to them and collaborating across that kind of a silo of two legacy companies that came together in a merger or an acquisition because I don't know enough about their competencies, for example. If you're in the kind of organization that does a lot of senior hiring, and you bring somebody in from a competitor, sometimes there's just kind of bad blood. You were both sales reps and you were trying to get the deal lined up, and now this person's allegedly on your team, but it's hard to let go. So sometimes when you do a lot of senior external hiring, interpersonal trust can be an issue. And it's worth thinking through whether the trust exists. Sometimes it's a lot more kind of mundane than that. There's not real trust dynamics that are standing in the way, but it's efficiency or the perceived inefficiency of collaboration. One thing that we know is that collaboration really requires an investment. So if I want to start collaborating with Kjaer and Sharon, there's a lot that we have to do in order to make that work well. We have to understand, each other's preferences and objectives. We have to understand our basis of expertise so there's not too much overlap, but there has to be enough so that we can actually work effectively together. We have to learn each other's jargon and ways of operating, and all of those costs of collaboration, whether it's at an interpersonal level or a system level, almost all of those costs happen kind of right up front. And all of the benefits that we can talk about, whether it's employee retention and engagement or increased revenues or market reputation, they take time to flow in. And so collaboration requires this investment. We have to get people on board. And sometimes people just say, I'm swamped and I can't make that investment right now. So let me jump to a how-to on that one. If in your organization you're hearing that people can't make collaboration a priority, you want to ask a couple of deeper questions. One is whether they have time to do some things, just not collaborate. In other words, do they have plenty of time to work in isolation? If yes, the underlying issue might be something to do with their KPIs or the reward system. Maybe they think that they're better off, they're better rewarded, they're better compensated, they're better recognized for individual contributions than group contributions. That's one place to look. Or if they say, no, I really believe in working as a team and I try it, but there's a lot that's holding me back, then ask if there are systemic ways that you can put in some fixes that truly make it more efficient and more effective. And I think getting to the root cause will help us understand why people aren't collaborating already. What do you have to do to break down some of those silos? Now, one thing I think that every person who deals in the realm of change management will tell you, Anna, this is getting back to your question about how do you break down silos. The more people feel like they were part of developing a solution, the more committed they are. And so trying to, it sounds kind of funny, but trying to sit at the top of an organization and dictate that people ought to collaborate more, unlikely to succeed. And so taking a truly collaborative approach to getting people to collaborate, it sounds like a chicken and egg problem. But what we know for sure is that when people are part of the diagnostic process, when you're reaching out to them and helping them understand what is standing in the way, simply asking those questions can be thought-provoking, and that can be part of the kind of unfreezing process that it takes to get organizations to change. And when you are asking for their participation and helping to craft some solutions, that can be really useful as well. One of the
Heidi,
reasons, yeah, please, Sharon, go
oh,
ahead.
sorry to jump in there, but this, I think you may have answered some of Sarah's questions. She was initially just making the statement that she's seen some companies suffer when the KPIs of division leaders actually incentivize them to compete against one another for resources and outcomes, which
Yes.
I think you probably touched on. And then Sarah's also asking, have you seen a skills tracking or reporting system work within a company to encourage or support collaboration?
Yes, absolutely. So let me touch back on that KPIs. It's funny how many people talk about healthy competition. When you've got your people competing against each other in any regard, unless it is the holiday sports day, it is not a healthy thing. I mean, I find it really anachronistic. It's kind of really old-fashioned leadership to say, let's throw everyone in the ring together and see who's standing at the end of a match. That kind of competition really isn't what's needed in 21st century collaboration. We need people to be understanding shared objectives. And yes, there will always be at some level scarce resources or other factors that do mean people need to make tough choices. But understanding how it is that they're going to be better off working collectively towards a shared aim is going to benefit the company and the organization. So yes, there can be real problems with KPIs that pit people against each other. That is a tough one to tackle, but if you really have a system like that, it's worth tackling it. It can be absolutely corrosive to getting people's behaviors to change. Sorry, Sharon, I got so in love with what I was saying that I've lost the second part of the question.
So have you seen a skills tracking or reporting system work within a company to encourage or support collaboration?
Yes, absolutely. So one thing that's really helpful is it actually starts with pretty crisp role definitions. And so people can understand what it is that they're expected to contribute. And then ideally, and I use as a model for this when I was at McKinsey for 5 years, we had a really well-developed personal development agenda that along 5 core competencies laid out at multiple levels how well somebody was doing. So say on the problem solving front, if I was a 1, I would engage in these particular kinds of actions. Whereas if I was better, if I was a 2, 3, 4, or 5, here's what I would actually be doing that demonstrated my level of competence in those areas. And so it was a 5 by 5 grid, if you will, 5 competencies, 5 levels on each with specific behavioral indicators of whether I was at that level or above or below it. And how does that help collaboration? Well, it really helps because I can go to somebody and say, here's what I'm really good at, and it's documented. I understand what it takes to do my job brilliantly, and I can speak with some degree of authority about the kinds of things I've done that have demonstrated that. So it's a way of demonstrating trustworthiness in the competence domain. It also allows people to have really honest conversations about where they're not brilliant. And I might be able to say, so written communication is not my forte. How do I make sure that on a team I have somebody who is fantastic at that? And it allows people to identify essentially gaps in their own portfolio. Nobody's supposed to be brilliant at everything. You're supposed to, in McKinsey parlance, have a spike, things that you're particularly good at. And it allows you to, in a more evidence-based way, say what you're not brilliant at and find somebody who is, so that you get that kind of countervailing complementarity. And I think that a skills tracking system like that works extremely well to not only help people understand where their real strengths are, but create a way to have the productive discussion about different kinds of strengths and how to bring those to bear.
Fantastic.
Actually,
Sarah,
Heidi, it reminds me of a story we got from one of our a couple of years ago now. They were tracking their collaboration patterns using SWOOP, and the CEO set up a special group on their enterprise social network and invited in all, we call them key influencers, but right, the most people that are connected with most other people as a way of, I guess, I think it is actually was seen as a reward, but actually the CEO was interested in finding out who are those people who got those networks that are so well connected, like the twin two in your example before. And I thought it was a really powerful way of actually rewarding people. I don't think it was set up as purely as a reward initiative. It was actually probably set up more like the CEO would like to tap into this pool of people that are obviously really well connected and get their insight. So it was about 200 people from across the company that was invited into this special discussion group, the CEO, to act as a bit of a feedback panel for the CEO, which I thought was a really interesting way of giving, I guess, informal reward or risk recognition.
I love it. I love it. And, that's, there's some of those commercials, money can't buy this, right? It's a reward that money can't buy, the recognition. And at a certain level, I mean, God willing, all of us on the call are at the point now where our basic needs are satisfied, and therefore the marginal utility of each extra, dollar or pound or euro is less significant for us. And oftentimes, as we get more senior in our careers, more successful, more financially stable, the kind of recognition that you're describing actually carries a huge amount of weight. People truly value being valued and having people recognize the efforts that they've put in. So I think that, Kjaer, that's a great story about recognition, and that kind of chairman's circle, or whatever it's called. We've seen that used to really great effect as well.
Heidi, can I in the chats, Jeff Ross is on here. He's one of the community managers at a big health insurer in the US, and Jeff actually shared a bit of an example in the chat. Jeff, did you want to jump in and just share that example of this recognition that you're talking about? This is a real life example, Heidi.
I love it.
Well, one of the things that we love about using SWOOP Analytics at our company is that it does give us the persona breakdowns, so that we see if people are just broadcasters or responders or catalysts, personas, observers, engagers, and so we did decide, once we started using SWOOP late last year, that we wanted to reward that engager level status in some way, because it indicated that people were being well-rounded in their giving and receiving. It still may not be measuring the specific outcomes of that interaction, but we knew that they were at least on the right behavior patterns in communicating to get to that point. And so we do have a wide host of things in the company that earn people points in a special account that do actually translate into some tangibles. But we are then rewarding those who reach that engager level status with a fairly generous amount of points in that account for them, and do it every 6 months to continue encouraging that behavior going forward.
Jeff, that's a really cool example. I'm glad you shared that. I think we're definitely seeing that people do make significant efforts when it comes to these, the community engagement like you're talking about. And what's really interesting is the kinds of organizations, the kind of efforts that organizations make to tap into that. They are influencers. They are, in some of the research I did with a big organization that was undergoing a sort of organizational transformation, we found that people like the ones you're describing, who are extremely well connected, were many, many, many times more influential in changing people's minds about whether the transformation was on the right track than the executives were.
Wow.
We looked inside this company, and we were able to take lots of pulse surveys about how people were feeling about the transformation, and through some of the analytics that we had access to, could see whom they had interacted with in the prior short amount of time, and able to actually show how their influence spread through people's opinions about the change effort. I mean, it was remarkable, actually. So worth knowing who they are and encouraging people to keep up that kind of community. I think, what's interesting is, what's happening in the virtual world these days. Now that people, many people are working remotely, some of them, very much involuntarily. So, how do you keep them connected? How do you make them feel like they're still valued members of the organization? How do you find out when they need help? And, and that's part of the how-to as well. We want to talk about what you can do to foster smart collaboration more strategically, frequently, and consistently. Sharon, thank you for your bravery. Everyone, this is a lot of information to take in here. What are we talking about here? Well, the Smart Collaboration Accelerator is a psychometric tool that came out of all these years of research we've been doing on the idea of smart collaboration. It's in essence a short, I don't know, Sharon, how long did it take you? Maybe 10 minutes to answer?
Yeah, no more than 10 minutes. Yeah.
Yeah, something 8-10 minutes most people takes to answer a set of online questions. And what it delivers then is an instant online report customized to where you fall out on 7 different behavioral dimensions that are related to smart collaboration. Now, one of those dimensions is what you see on here. On the left, it says Dimension 1, your typical tendencies, wary versus trusting. So a wary person doesn't trust anyone until it's proven that they should trust the person. They're sort of less optimistic that things will definitely work out, whereas trusting people automatically trust someone. They say, I will trust you until proven otherwise, and I'm quite optimistic that things will work out. So Sharon, after you answered a series of questions, I should say that these questions aren't, quite so in your face as to say, are you wary or trusting? It gives you some sort of scenarios that you think through. And Sharon came out somewhat more on the trusting side. And so the report then generates based on, customized report based on your answers. Here are some of the actions that we would talk about with Sharon. To promote smart collaboration, create some opportunities to audition your potential collaborators. Sharon, you're generally quite trusting, but we know because you're not fully trusting, there will be times when it depends. Maybe you trust somebody, maybe you're a little bit hesitant. So if you need to work with somebody and you are still have some question marks in your mind, how can you think about kind of before it's absolutely essential that you work together, how do you get to know this person in terms of both their character and their competency? Can you work on something low risk together? Maybe get involved in some committee work together or a pro bono project or some other kind of activity that you'll get to know who they are, and likewise, you'll get them to understand what you're capable of. The second thing is to make sure you're signaling your trustworthiness. Sometimes people who are somewhat more on the trusting side assume that other people will automatically trust them. And you have to realize that, Sharon, some of your colleagues may well be extremely wary. And if you don't keep that in mind, you might not go out of your way to figure out how you demonstrate that you can be trusted. What are the things that you can do, not in a hugely self-promotional way, because that's, oftentimes icky and countercultural, but, how do you get other people to be a reference for you? How do you speak in ways that communicate the value that you add to the projects that you're on? And how do you increase your positive reputation? So some things that you want to do as a trusting person are creating these opportunities to audition people if you do feel a bit wary, and signaling your trustworthiness because other people might be very wary.
So Heidi, just going back to what that looks like,
Yeah.
At the moment where obviously everyone's working remotely. So I'm thinking, and this is also background from talking to some customers of ours, but would that audition process be things like, if I'm using an enterprise social network like Yammer or Workplace or something, I might jump into one of the social groups, a pet group or for example, and I start sharing a photo, or I comment on someone's photo of a dog, and we start to build up that sort of, is that the sort of auditioning that would work? So it's not specifically related to my day-to-day role, but it's building that that sort of trust? Auditioning people within my organization?
Yeah, absolutely. That sounds like a very low risk way to do it. Yep, fantastic. And that can reveal something about you and your willingness to engage with other people and start that interpersonal familiarity. It might not span the whole way to them saying, well, therefore, Sharon commented on my cockapoo, and therefore I think I'm going to give her a giant piece of work. But, it matters that you and I have at least some connection there. So I might, at least reach out to ask your advice on something. And then depending how clever your advice is, may say, oh, well, next time I actually will, rely on something, bigger picture for, more consequential.
So it's not so much an immediate thing, but it's something that will build up over, maybe days or weeks or whatever. And that's, okay. I was just interested to know what it looks like, so
yes,
thank you. That's
yeah, it looks just like that. I mean, it also might mean that, you think about it. We often talk about a trust staircase. So maybe the first rung on the ladder or step on the staircase is something really small, like the pet group, and then it is asking for advice, and then it's working together on a not highly consequential project, and and then you demonstrate trustworthiness that way. Then you move up to something that's a bit more important until ultimately you're working on really important stuff together because you've built that basis of trust and you've done it one step at a time.
Thank you. That's great.
Yeah, now Sharon, you'll know this from reading your report, but it's worth mentioning to people that there aren't any right and wrong ways of operating. If you think back to that spider web diagram, those two twins, a lot of people assume that there is one type of person who is twin two. And our research and research-backed philosophy is that wherever your natural tendencies are, you can leverage those authentically to become better at collaboration. So people who are highly trusting are very helpful for collaboration because they tend to widen their circle of collaborators quite quickly. That said, in a group like that, somebody who's wary can be incredibly powerful to say, hang on, we've just, thought about giving a major assignment to Tommy, and none of us have really tested his capacity yet. Don't you think we ought to hold off and give him something not so high risk, let him stretch his wings a bit, and then give him that next assignment? And so having somebody who's a bit wary, especially in a group of very highly trusting people, can be, a very appropriate word of caution. There are lots of ways that wary individuals can be fantastic collaborators because they're going to be helping to counterbalance some of the optimism bias, for example. And so wherever somebody falls, they can be a great collaborator. That said, somebody who's over trusting can be a little bit problematic. So for everyone, we give you not only actions to leverage that natural tendency as a strength, but also some watch outs, things that you want to be careful of. In this case, for people who are balanced between wary and trusting, one thing we say is figure out what it is that triggers your trust or distrust. And along with that, actively manage bias. Because human nature says that whether we're wary or trusting, whomever we decide to trust, it's likely that our initial impression of trustworthiness will be based on some superficial characteristics that signal chemistry and similarity. So we need to be really careful. Even if you're a reasonably trusting individual, you need to stop and say, gosh, normally I'm pretty trusting. I'm getting a bad sense about this person. What is it? And is it some kind of a stereotype or bias that's standing in the way? And then actively manage that. So this Smart Collaboration Accelerator has 7 different dimensions. I'll go through the second one. This one is dimension 2, complex and concrete. So 4 of the 7 dimensions relate to the part of smart collaboration, which is identifying and tackling those complicated problems. And this is one of those. The wary trusting is one of the 3 dimensions that relates to the way you interact at a human-to-human level to bring out the best in the team. So this one is a question of, are you more drawn to complex problems, those that are philosophical and abstract? Do you really like, innovative ideas and connecting these different concepts, which ostensibly seem to be very different? Is that who you are? Is that the kind of problem you love to solve? Or are you really practical and concrete? You're pretty skeptical of new things until you see that there's some value in it, and you prefer to deal with, the pragmatics. And Sharon, wow, you are like on the concrete end of this scale.
Who knew? I would not have predicted that.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's so interesting you say that, because oftentimes we see people who have either blind spots, or we're able to show through these kinds of tests some areas where it doesn't mean you're not good at solving complex problems. It may mean that that's just not what you're initially drawn to. And it's worth thinking that through. I actually had the same reaction, Sharon, because I'm very, very, very highly concrete. And I was thinking, hang on, I'm an academic. I develop theories and it doesn't mean that I can't think theoretically and abstractly, and that I'm no good at that. I can, and I have to be. But what I really want to know is, so what, right? At the end of a big theoretical debate, what I'm going to say is, and what do we do with that? How do we take that forward? And so I'm extremely concrete, and I wouldn't have called myself that, right? But it's good to know, because here are some things that I can do, and Sharon, you can do, as
Yes.
both being high on that concrete sense, make abstract concepts relatable. When we hear people kind of circling around up here at the 10,000 meters, like, okay, so hang on, what are we really getting at here? Making sure that we dig into how does everyone relate to this concept, and what are the so what factors? It means you're less likely to leave a team meeting still at the level of big picture. You're probably likely to walk away with some next steps. That said, we need to make sure that anyone who's drawn to really concrete problems is also leaning into the VUCA ones. Just because things are uncertain or ambiguous doesn't mean that they're not valuable to tackle. In fact, those are usually the kinds of opportunities that generate the need for smart collaboration. So make sure, in your very practical mindset, that you are taking a step back and saying, wait, what's the big picture here? And should we embrace some creative thinking time, some big picture time before driving towards execution? So those are some of the watch outs, Sharon, and I'm saying for you and for me, given that we're both highly on the concrete side.
I love that. Yeah. And the way you described it actually just definitely makes more sense, because I am that sort of person that, yeah, we can talk about this, but what do I take away from it? And what action do I have as a result of this conversation? So yeah,
Absolutely.
Thank you for explaining that.
Absolutely. So how does this all relate to collaboration? Well, all of these dimensions are behavioral dimensions of collaboration, which again, you can be, at either end of these dimensions. You could be a risk seeker or a risk spotter. You could be hands-on versus hands-off. And we help people understand how to become a better collaborator in and of themselves. We can also then bring a group together and say, what's the profile of a group? So maybe everyone in the group is a real concrete thinker. And our advice then would be, all right, do you need to have, kind of an outside facilitator? If you're trying to do a brainstorming session, do you want to have somebody else come in who is the big complex thinker to make sure you're not, getting down into the nitty gritty too soon, for example? So really practical ideas about, when is collaboration going to really benefit you, and what might you do in order to make it more successful?
Yep. Oh, there was a question for just that in the chat, and you've just answered it. So thank you for that.
Okay. You let me talk long enough, Sharon. I'm bound to get there sooner or later. Psychological safety. I'm not sure if people are familiar with this term or not. Let me quickly talk about what it is, and then I know Kai wanted to jump in here too. But psychological safety is a concept that's been studied for many, many decades. But one of my colleagues at Harvard Business School, Amy Edmondson, really popularized this when she was studying surgical teams. She was asked to look at what was going on in teams. There was a real paradox in a hospital where it seemed that the teams that were making the most mistakes during a surgery actually had the best patient outcomes. And that was completely counterintuitive. So what was happening? What she found is that it wasn't that those teams with the better patient outcomes, better recovery times, less likelihood of returning to the hospital, all kinds of good patient outcomes. Those teams weren't making more mistakes. They were admitting the mistakes that they made and learning from them. Whereas the teams that seemed not to have mistakes, they had at least as many mistakes, but nobody felt safe to admit it or to ask for help or to point out to the high status person, hey, doc, you're about to, suture this and you've left a sponge inside the incision, right? I mean, those are the kinds of things that you want people to be speaking up about, and they have to have the psychological safety in order to do that. It's really defined as the team members' ability to feel safe to take risks and be vulnerable in front of each other. So in the business context, maybe that's asking for help or admitting mistakes. Sharing personal aspirations can feel like a risk in some organizations because it looks like you're a climber or some competitive, so you want to be able to share what it is that you're trying to get out of your work and your assignments, or speaking up about bias. That's something that really feels risky in some organizations. Do people feel psychologically safe to take risks and be vulnerable? And last thought I will leave you with here is that it's leaders who create the conditions and the members reinforce the team climate. So it really is up to the leader. It's very hard to have a psychologically safe team environment if the leader doesn't embrace that concept that people ought to be speaking up and ought to feel safe. So how do they do that? I mean, people within the team can ask for and use feedback. If the leader does it especially, it's really powerful. So the idea that I want to learn from both what's worked well and especially when things haven't worked so well. So tell me about it and let's talk about it. Replacing blame with curiosity. Not, Heidi, you did this wrong, but rather, where were you headed when you turned left instead of right? Why did you go that direction? What was signaling that you should have turned? How did you think about it? Is there somebody you can double check with? Curiosity, what's going on and why did we make those decisions? And that's linked as well to the idea of an after action review. Really, not just, there's a terrible term that sometimes is used in business. If you lose a pitch, for example, or a project, goes badly wrong, people talk about a post-mortem, and they only want to examine things and figure out why they died. Well, I had the privilege of working with one of the largest hedge funds, most successful hedge funds in the world, Bridgewater Associates. And I learned from their founder, who's now Chief Investment Officer, Ray Dalio, that it is just as important to learn from successes as it is failures. And so don't only limit your post hoc examinations to times when things didn't go well. Figure out for things that did go well, why they went well and what's replicable about them. So those are some of the things that really help to create a sense in a team or in an organization even that it's safe to take risks and be vulnerable in front of one another.
Heidi, I'm just conscious of the time, so I'll hand over to Kjaer because he's got some research as well. But Heidi, can everyone jump on and have a go at the psychological test that I did as well?
Yeah, so if people are interested in that, they should get in touch with me directly and we can provide them that information and we'll be happy to follow up with them.
Great. Kjaer, I'm handing over to you.
Well, we're sort of on the final sort of home stretch, so there was just a couple of closing comments that I wanted to make. This whole thing around psychological safety is also something that we at SWOOP are incredibly interested in. And it's from a measurement perspective, it's one of those where you go, well, how on earth would you measure that? Some of those things, and it is not easy. And we've got to be very careful about not trying to oversimplify things when we're trying to put metrics in. But I want to show you a couple of things that we're doing that we think will help sort of go towards providing indicators for how well we are. Indicators that help us assess psychological safety. So the slide I've got up here is really just based on research. It's by Amy Edmondson. It's about lots of other people. We sort of summarized in these high characteristics of our high performing teams and how they interact with each other. And this whole thing about asking questions, you mentioned curiosity, is absolutely a core part. And you can actually measure that if you go into either into Workplace or to Yammer or to Teams. We can find out how many. It's as simple as finding out, is there a question mark in the sentence? And it's incredibly revealing. Organizations and individuals that just never ask questions. And we know how important it is for senior leaders to start those conversations so people feel safe to answer them. So that psychological safety really happens at the individual level with senior leaders asking them. And we can also see, if you look across a whole organization, we can see, well, if people are mostly posting messages, but people aren't responding, maybe they don't feel safe if we have this one-way broadcasting organization as opposed to having two-way conversations. And if you go inside a team, we would like to see that the whole team is interacting with each other. There are lots of these two-way relationships between team members, and we know that people are talking with each other and not to each other. Thanks to Heidi for participating in this session today. It's been absolutely fantastic having you here. And I know we could go on for another hour, 2 hours, 3 hours, 4 hours. And I know the names of many of the people on the call here. There's such a wonderful community of people here that if only we could meet, and whenever we get to meet again, I can't wait to see you all and have a yarn about how we can improve collaboration in our organizations.
Oh,
I'll just hand it back to
Thank you so much for having me, Kjaer and Sharon. Appreciate it very much.
Thank you so much, Heidi. It's been so interesting. Heidi, can you just maybe share in the chat what's the best way for people to contact you to be able to go ahead with the survey? We've shared a few links in there. Sarah was commenting on the slide that Kjaer had. We've got a whole, it's only a couple of page report, or not, small tips as well that people might find helpful. And I just want to thank everybody for joining in, and please contact us, leave a message in the chat if you've got any more questions.